Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the ZapSec Modernization Series. I'm Carl Schneider, Vice President at ZapSec, and I'm joined by Anup Tuppad, who's our Senior Network Architect. Anup, I want to talk some about something I hear on a routine basis that I think needs to be cleaned up, and that has to do with network refreshes or
Mhm.
transformations and getting it right. Like, I'll give you an example. I had coffee with the CIO last week. And the company is like a mid-market manufacturer. They've got like 80 sites globally. So, they're distributed, but the guy's really, really sharp. And when I mentioned something about doing a network modernization, he immediately says, Carl, honestly, we just need to swap out some old switches. And sadly, that was his entire framing for what we were talking about.
Yeah, let me guess. He said 6 months of timeline and hardware only budget. Is that right?
Exactly. Exactly. He had the whole project mapped out in his head before I even finished my sentence. And like you said, he was talking 6 months. It's just capital budget, minimal disruption. We'll have the whole thing done by Q3.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that is exactly where it always, always goes sideways, I think, because the moment you call it a refresh, you lock it in and set some of the assumptions that do not actually match the reality, right? The board hears this as like a switch swap, and we are just going to swap out some switches, and that's it. And the finance get approved on the hardware line items, and the CISO figures, security comes later, and ops assumes that nothing changes. Every single one of those assumptions will be wrong. By month four, the CIO is back in front of the board, like managing political crisis because the project was never a refresh. It could not have been, right? But the word made refresh believe it was a refresh.
Exactly. I mean, we've seen it so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
times, right? So walk me through what actually breaks, because I think most CIOs assume positioning of this kind of project is actually a minor thing.
Yeah, so we have five things, Carl, and they compound, right? The first one would be the budget envelope is wrong. The board approved the hardware capital because that is what a refresh sounds like for everybody. But the real project needs architecture services. Security designing should happen. We need automation development, and most of it is important as staff upskilling. Roughly about 60% of the actual cost is invisible at the time of approval, but just because of that, you feel that you are unfunded before you even start.
Yeah, not a good start. So what's second?
Yeah. Like second, let me come to the timeline expectations, right? The stakeholders hear refresh word and they think, okay, 6 months is good enough to get a refresh done and, swap the switches. The reality is, 12 to 18 months once you factor in architecture changes, you have phased migrations in them and hypercare. By month four, in reality, executive frustration is building and because of that timeline has slipped. It did not actually slip, it was never realistic, right?
Yeah, it seems like more important than timeline would be the metrics for the project.
Yeah, that's where the third point comes in, right? The KPI becomes device replaced, the number of devices replaced in that. That is the procurement metric, not the actual metric, not a business success outcome. You should be measuring the deployment speed, cost per port, and security posture and engineering capacity recovered and all of that. You measure a wrong thing, you optimize the wrong thing, and you get a wrong outcome
Yeah, exactly.
altogether.
Yeah, it's like you're aiming in the wrong place to begin with. And the other thing is when I was
Exactly.
talking to him, it seemed like security was the last thing he was thinking about. So what about security?
I think that's the big one. The elephant in the room has to be answered. The fourth one would be like security becomes a phase four afterthought for some, most of the organizations when they do this refresh called a project. But by phase four, every architectural decision that matters is already locked. Routing design, segmentation boundaries, encryption policies, and all that, right? All that is done. Phase four is like hardening is a cosmetic change. Like it is a decoration on an architecture, right? That already made every decision that matters and retrofitting the cost, 3 to 5 times more than building it in, right?
Wow. Yeah. So let's talk about the fifth failure pattern here because you always say this is the one that hurts the most.
Yeah, yeah, that this one kills me. This one is operating model that never changes, right? Like you spend around $12 million on a beautiful new hardware everywhere, and
Mhm.
6 months later, the senior engineer like me is still doing manual SSHing into, devices one at a time, the same CLI commands, the same change windows, same troubleshooting book, which I've been using like, from 2015 or something. That's old age, right? And the hardware changed, like, nowadays the hardware has changed, nothing else, right? That is not transformation. That is a really expensive equipment swap.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's flip this for a second. Let's say it's the same organization, same budget. What changes if the CIO, positions this as a transformation from day one?
Everything downstream, like budget scope expands to include architecture, security, automation, hypercare, and all of that. And that sounds like more money. I understand that, but it is not, right? It is the same money allocated honestly, right? The refresh budget overruns by the same amount, but you just do not like account for it upfront, right?
Right, right. That makes sense. And I'm assuming similarly timeline, right?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. You plan for like 12 to 18 months and deliver in 12 months. That sounds like intuitive, but transformation, uh, approach lets you run parallel delivery pods, like I would say three concurrent migration streams instead of a side by side. For example, Zapsec or what we have done this across 107 sites in 24 countries already. The team that plans the transformation delivery faster than the team that discovers it and and the transformation is mid-flight, right?
Yeah, that makes total sense, right?
Yeah.
Those parallel
Mm,
paths allow you to just get a lot
exactly.
wider, a lot farther, a lot faster. But let's talk about operating model. Let's skip down to operating model. How does that look different in this scenario?
Okay, this is the critical difference I want to talk about. With transformation, approach includes the operating model shift from day one. Okay, and platform operations or intent-based automations. Your team actually adopts all these, shifts. KPIs the CEO cares about is deployment speed, mean time to resolution, and cost per port. And hardware deprecates, the day you install it. Just like a car, you get it out of the showroom, and then your depreciation starts
Right.
from that moment, right? And operating model improvements compound every year. The refresh gives you a 5-year asset, but when you do a transformation, that gives you a 10-year capability.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it's worth doing the upfront work. So how do AI and zero trust fit into all this?
That this is actually interesting. They are architectural prerequisites that transform. The transformation includes and refresh ignores entirely. The AI needs a deterministic performance here, like microsegmentations, streaming telemetry. Zero trust needs consistent policy enforcement backed into the architecture, and a transformation builds all of that in, like same investment, fundamentally different readiness for next 2 years later, right?
Right, right. And here's the thing, based on what this conversation I had with him, that he was saying, look, if I walk in and call this a transformation, the board is going to think it's some massive, expensive, risky program. That's so much easier if I go in saying it's a refresh. I can get that approved. Honestly, I get it. I understand why he's saying that, but it's a real concern to position it as a refresh instead of a transformation.
I agree. It is, right? And it is also wrong, right? Look, the refresh does not get approved, well, it does get approved faster, right? No questions asked because they think it's just a refresh. Like as we spoke before, it's just replacing those switches according to them. But it gets approved with the wrong budget. right? The wrong timeline, the wrong success criteria. And by month four, the CIO is right back in front of the board, explaining why they need more money, more time, and a bigger scope. Think about which conversation is actually worse, right? The one is where you ask for a right thing up front at the beginning, or the one where you come back 4 months later admitting that the original ask was wrong,
Yeah, exactly. And
right?
that's the concern I had coming away from that conversation because it seems like the having that harder conversation up front is actually the easier path for the long term.
Yeah, the CIO who says this is a transformation, here what it includes, like realistic timelines, here how we will measure the success. He has those KPIs set, and the CIO, so that CIO has I would say, a governed, productive relationship with board for the next 18 months. The CIO who says, this is a quick refresh, will be done by Q3. No, I think that will definitely will have an escalating conflict from month four itself that never fully resolves even after the project finishes,
Totally
right?
agree. I totally agree. And I can
Yeah.
add something too on, let's talk about the financial positioning, right? Because I think this really matters. If you walk into a board meeting and you start with, hey, we have 400 end of life switches that need replacing, well, that sounds like IT is just asking for capital to maintain the status quo.
Hmm.
Nobody gets excited about that. Quite the opposite. Instead, if he comes in and leads with, we can reduce our annual infrastructure cost by 30% and also eliminate compliance exposure and build the architectural foundation we need for AI and zero trust. You know what? That turns it into a business case. And CFOs love business cases. They fund business cases. They don't fund tech debt.
I 100% agree on that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so let's talk about this a little deeper. Now, again, we're really framing this in refresh versus transformation, and I think we've got some points here that are really important. I think the image down on the right-hand side really it describes the pain that someone's going to experience if they do approach it as a refresh, right? So let's talk about that as like kind of like your before state, you've just done a refresh versus the transformation we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, I would say I would describe it very briefly. So it's a simple state where you did the refresh, and the outcome is your legacy three-tier architecture and tangled dependencies, and you have a single point failure across your deployment, where one of the switches fails or one of the routers fails, and everything else fails, right? And you have a complete downtime on that, and manual operations, and a frustrated engineer like me wondering, we have done the refresh, but nothing has changed and we still have high risk and slow changes, right? So
Right.
that is what represents on the left side.
Yeah, so let's talk about like in the transformation approach instead, try to treat it as kind of the after that's done, how it looks so much
Yeah.
different.
So the difference after we do the transformation rather than a refresh, the outcome is very well defined here. Basically, the software defined, span and leaf architecture is there. We have a central control, replacing CLI per box operations. Like I said, I don't want to do, CLI to CLI per box configuration one by one. Like I want to have a central control plane where I want to do all the configuration at once, push it to the devices, and then I forget about it, and everything is easy and smooth. And basically, what I'm saying is automated provisioning can help in this, and then cloud connectivity is easier. Then it basically lowers the cost of deployment. And we have a faster deployment with this, and not a vendor promise, but it is vendor neutral as well. And that is what happens when operational or operating model actually changes, right?
Right, right. So like same budget, same team, just different approach, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. The only difference is how the project was approached on day one, right?
Right. Like
It's
same
the same
organization.
organization.
Yeah.
Yep, same infrastructure, same
Same
investment.
investment.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only variable, right,
The
is the framing,
mhm.
the positioning of the project
Yeah,
as a whole from day one.
e- exactly. That is where I would say the variable is how you approach this project
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
every single thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess in summary, we can say let's stop calling it a refresh, right? When you mean transformation, say transformation, right?
Exactly, exactly. We have to stop calling it a refresh. We have to call it a transformation. That makes more sense.
Excellent. Thanks, Anup. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Don't forget, ZapSec helps companies like yours modernize their network infrastructure in ways that maximize the ROI. From scoping and framing the project to guiding the work itself, we've been there and we've done that. If any of this resonates with you, we'd welcome a conversation on how to bring this sort of transformation to your organization. Visit zapsec.com or reach out to myself or Anoop directly. Our email addresses are visible at the beginning of the video.